This spring at the Boston Ujima Project is Fugitivity 101, Refusal, Escape, and Exodus. In this series of workshops, we will be exploring the concept of fugitivity and its intricate relationships with Blackness, liberation, and economic justice. Tonight, we will engage in a creative reflection and activation of fugitive practice in this session as Jessica shares How We Be Free, a Black fugitive study kit consisting of a set of playing cards, dice, and a reference booklet. The How We Be Free study kit honors legacies and practices of Black fugitivity, freedom seeking, and maroonage. We will engage Black fugitivity through an embodied practice of storytelling, creative writing, and cartographic mind maps, rooting ourselves in ancestral legacies of collective resistance and community care. We will nourish critical reflections of how these technologies can be applied to support current movement towards liberation. Jessica Valoris is an interdisciplinary artist and community facilitator based in Washington, D.C. She weaves together mixed media, painting, installation, ritual performance, and social practice to create sacred spaces. Inspired by the earth-based traditions of her Black American and Jewish ancestry, Jessica's art activates ancestral wisdom, personal reflection, and community study. Jessica's work is both balm and blueprint, mapping out pathways for the Black liberatory imagination and reviving recipes for collective care. She collaborates with organizers and cultural workers to facilitate community rituals of remembrance and conversations about reparations, abolition, earth stewardship, mutual aid, and transformative justice. Please give a round of applause and welcome Jessica.
Thank you, Mary. That introduction was better than what I could have given myself. So, it's really a blessing. Oh, wow, all the claps. Thank you. It's a blessing to be here with you all today. And yeah, it's my intention to share this project that I've been working on. And through sharing this project, hopefully affirm the ways that fugitivity may already exist in your life, in your practice, in your community, and nourish movements towards different forms of justice and liberation for us all. So, okay. If I was in the room, this is the first time I'm sharing this in a virtual way. So if I was in the room, there'd be a bunch of objects on the table and artifacts for us to interact with and music, and we would have some sort of cipher, but we're virtual and hybrid and in person at the same time. So we're gonna do this through kind of a shared screen model. I'm gonna share a little bit about what the How We Be Free study kit is, how it came together, how it's emerging. And then I'm going to guide us through two creative exercises that engage elements of the kit for us to think about, learn about fugitivity, and reflect on how that lives for us or is alive for us in our everyday practices. Does that sound okay for folks? Okay, cool. Okay, so the story of, well, I'm like, should I? Yeah, let me tell you the story first, and then I'll show you some images, and then we'll get into it. So about 4-ish years ago, I want to say like 2018, 2019, I was just in a place of feeling a lot of desperation around the state of the world and the way Black folks, the condition of Black folks, how we were being treated, and still living very much in the aftermaths of slavery and the violences that slavery that continue to persist because of that. And I was looking for just like an example of when Black people win. And this was particularly, I don't remember what the exact, what was happening at the exact time, but I was just in a low place. And around that same time, I had come across a database called Freedom on the Move that documents fugitive slave ads. And for those who are not familiar, fugitive slave ads were advertisements that were printed in newspapers throughout the United States in the 1700s and 1800s that advertised the hunting of African Americans who had escaped their enslavement or their enslaver. Sometimes they were posted by the enslaver. Sometimes they were posted by police departments, sheriff's departments. Sometimes they were posted by insurance companies or lawyers. But all of them were seeking to hunt Black folks who had escaped their captivity. And so this database was asking folks to help transcribe these documents so that they could be used for archival and genealogical research. And I got kind of obsessed with this archive. The documents themselves are pretty horrific, but they do hold in them information about a person or persons or group of people who had escaped and were able to free themselves for a moment in time. Most of the folks, we don't know what happened to them beyond that advertisement. But for me, there was something sacred about sitting with their names and the little bits of descriptions that were available through these advertisements. And so I started just sitting with, I started printing them out. I was helping to transcribe these documents and then started printing them out, underlining the names, underlining any description. Sometimes it would offer an age or a loved one who might be in the area, or if they had any particular skills, like if they could read or write, what they might have been wearing, sometimes who they were escaping from or where they thought they might be escaping to. And I just wanted to find a way to honor these people that felt like their names, their stories had been kind of lost to history or neglected in the public record. So that's what kind of started this deep dive into fugitivity. And later that year, so in I guess that wasn't that year, I guess it was the year after, 2020, Juneteenth became a national holiday. And there was all of this talk about abolition, but very disconnected from the legacy of abolition in regards to its connection to the abolition of slavery and how the abolitionist movements that we exist in now to abolish prisons and policing are actually an extension of that movement. And what was starting to happen was kind of like a co-optation of this story, of emancipation that was kind of becoming like appropriated into this American story that actually felt too convenient and really performative. And for me, it felt like it was whitewashing this story in that specifically around Juneteenth, it was focusing on the General Gordon Granger, who's a white general who, as the story goes, storms into Galveston to free the Black folks who have been enslaved, even though the Emancipation Proclamation had been passed years prior. And what that story, even though that is a part of the story, it erased all of the U.S. colored troops who were part of emancipating Black folks throughout the South. It erased all of the Black folks who fought in the Civil War, who made actually turned the tides of the Civil War to make the Emancipation Proclamation possible. It erased the hundreds of Black folks who had escaped themselves, risked all kinds of their livelihood, risked the livelihoods of their family and connections to their family in order to escape, in order to build networks of care, in order to build networks of undergrounds, in order to build networks of abolitionist organizing and printing presses and law firms and like all of these legacies of Black folks that actually made freedom possible, made the Emancipation Proclamation possible. We're still seeking freedom. But it erased them in this narrative. And I wanted to know about all the ways that Black folks freed themselves. Also, I just have to say, so part of what sparked this was me and a friend of mine were doing a Juneteenth activation, and I was preparing a flag to like walk the streets in this procession for Juneteenth. And I didn't know what the flag needed to say. I know it needed words on it, but I didn't know what it needed to say. And through a meditation, what had come through, which felt like very much like an ancestral voice, was just, we freed ourselves. And so from there really started another deep dive for me in figuring out what were all the ways that Black folks freed themselves during slavery. And that then continued to grow, like how were enslaved Black folks thinking about liberation activating liberation even amidst captivity, and hoping that in sitting with those stories and honoring those legacies, that could help galvanize our movements for liberation today. So that's where all of this came out of. What started to emerge was lots of different art, ritual performance, visual art, mixed media art. And then I started to invite other folks in to be in process with me and create rituals of remembrance, specifically in DC, but also in some other other places and sites, like the Great Dismal Swamp and Fort Monroe. And my mind was just like blown at like learning about all of these histories of Black fugitivity and Marronage. I had studied Black history in undergrad. That was my concentration. The little that I learned about Marronage was based on the legacies of Marronage, specifically in like Jamaica and Brazil and Cuba and Colombia. And so I was really inspired by those histories, but I also wanted to know what happened here and how formations of Black fugitivity looked in the continental US, so that we could also be a part of this larger diasporic story. So what has emerged from that? I'm going to just share this this short little YouTube slideshow so you can see what the study kit looks like. What emerged from that and through continued study, practice, creative reflection was this study kit. It's called How We Be Free, a Black Fugitive Study Kit, and it contains a set of cards that you can see all have like custom images on them. Each speak to different practices, histories of Black fugitivity, and there's a set of dice too, and y'all saw those images earlier. We'll come back to that when we dive into an exercise together, and I can share a little bit more about what all of them represent. So this just shows like some of the prototyping around that. I've been holding community study sessions, kickbacks, Black study cohorts to be engaging with the cards and the dice. There's also a booklet that like provides more information and small like quotes and prompts. So it is something that is like has come out of my creative practice, but is definitely being nourished and nurtured by community. And that feels really important part of the process. So I'll stop it there. But I just wanted y'all to kind of just see a sneak peek of what the kit looks like. Yeah. So for the next few minutes, we're going to dive into a creative practice. So I'm going to ask everybody to take a deep breath with me all together. Inhale and release. This requires no artistic experience. It just requires something to write with, or if you have your phone, you can use your notes app. And I'm going to share the dice again. And when I do this, I'm going to ask you to just choose one that is speaking to you. It could be the same one that you chose in the check-in. And we're just going to write for 3 minutes. And I want you to try and recall a story or a memory that this symbol calls forth for you. What does it represent for you? And I'm going to, I don't think I can play music and share screen at the same time. So we'll just write in silence for about 3 minutes. And then folks will be invited to share if you want to share, but no pressure, you don't have to. So 3 minutes, I'm going to put a timer on starting now. Take about 1 more minute. Okay, start to bring your writing to a close. I would love anybody who is brave enough to come share on the mic or unmute yourself to share a story or a memory or a meaning that you're making of one of these symbols. Is it Deonta?
Yes. Yeah, Deonta. Yeah, you said it right.
Great.
Hi. One of the symbols that I chose to write about, this one might be a little bit obvious, like me explaining it, but the cousining one, because it just makes me think of, cousins and like the sleepovers that I'd have with my cousins when I was younger, and we would like make up dances and like be like my favorite would be like the Cheetah Girls, and like I was always Raven. But I feel like this symbol definitely like it really represents like familiarity, but like not in a blood related type of way, but just in like meeting people that feel like home and childhood and like joy and like imagination, like kind of being like reignited. Makes me think of like the people and like friends that I've like chosen to surround myself with that um end up reminding me of that.
Thank you so much, Deonta. So cousining refers to the ways that Black folks during slavery created family across bloodlines. And there's actually a term that's often used within genealogy called landkin, which is when folks basically created families based off of who they were, the land that they were enslaved on. So cousining is really important because it's a way that our ancestors created networks of care and networks for escape. So oftentimes when folks were escaping, they were escaping through these networks that had often been created by the ways that families were separated and displaced and dispersed. So someone often in a lot of the fugitive slave ads, you'll see it'll mention somebody like, oh, they were trying to, they're probably going to be in this area because their wife is in this area, or they had children who were at this plantation, or they had a mother or a brother, or it often mentions some kind of family network because those were the networks and the routes through which people were able to escape, often because family was harboring people on their escape north, or sometimes their escape to other areas. North wasn't the only direction that people escaped to. So cousining is a really important Black fugitive practice. And it's something that we continue, but don't always name as part of that legacy. So thank you for sharing your story and the way you're making meaning of cousining. Anybody else want to share a symbol that is a memory or a way that you're making meaning of one of these symbols? Don't be shy. I see you in the space. Would you like to share?
Unmuted. Okay. Hi. So my symbol was return again. Actually, I can't sit right now. It was return, and it called to mind sort of a return to my own roots, my heritage, and also my sense of self. But the symbol also reminds me of the sort of the Sankofa bird. And actually, it reminded me of a recent memory a couple months ago in the DC area, which is also a place that I call home, where the Sankofa bird was used by a food business called Queen Mother. I don't know if you've seen that yet. So it's a Black-owned restaurant in the National Landing area, and they specialize in deep fried chicken, fried in duck fat. It's Black-owned, but I've never seen anyone Black working there. And one day, there were two older Black women who I think they had driven from pretty far to get there. And they were looking around, they were about to order something from Queen Mother, but they felt so duped because they were like, we saw this restaurant on the news, but yeah, they said it was Black owned, but I don't see anybody Black working here. And they were like, this is a trick. And so it reminded me a little bit of co-optation and sort of the ways that, our symbols and the things that are deeply meaningful for us can be co-opted for corporate purposes and for profit-seeking purposes. The other thing it reminded me of was the Sankofa farm in West Philly at Bartram's Garden, which is also a happy place for me, and a recent place where I felt some deep healing. So that was it for me.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing both of those memories. So return definitely refers to is inspired by the Sankofa symbol. Return also references the ways that family was really important to the conception of liberation for Black folks who were seeking their freedom. So a lot of folks who were able to escape to the north, often to northern states or to Canada, would often write back to the abolitionists that helped to escape them in order to try and help escape other people in their family. And so return kind of refers to the ways that we're not free until all of us are free, and how we continue to return for each other, to retrieve each other, to find refuge for each other. One huge thing that I learned as I was doing some of this research is that no matter where you go in the South, of the documented cases of people escaping their enslavement, only half were folks who were escaping to a free state. The other half, and the percentages vary based off of location and year and what was happening during that time, but the other half were often escaping to other plantations or other farms where people were held captive so that they could be in proximity to their families. And so there was a practice of folks creating dugouts on the borderlands of plantations so that they could be in proximity to their loved ones. And so I think about this and other practices of like petit marronage, where folks found refuge for a time, or refuge that was very precarious, but in order to maintain the social ties of family. And so return also references how we continue to return to each other over and over again. Thank you for sharing that. Are there any other folks who would like to share a memory or a story that came up for them? Okay. I don't see anybody, so I'm gonna give it a moment. All right. So we're gonna jump into another exercise, and we'll have another 3 minutes. This exercise is a mapping exercise. So what I'm gonna ask you to do is to consider what your own liberation journey has looked like. So you can consider the questions: what has shaped the meaning of liberation for you? Who has shaped that? Maybe there are certain people or books or moments in history who have really shaped how you and your community are thinking about liberation. Thinking about what are the things that you're committed to, running towards? What are the things that you are running from or refusing? What fugitive practices might be emerging for you? So I'm going to invite you to create a mind map. There's no right way or wrong way to do this. So this could be doodles, this could be text, this could be a web, but just spend the next 3 minutes just trying to map out your own journey, your own liberation journey. And then we'll take some time. I'll share some other like fun facts, I guess, about Black fugitivity and see if there are any ways that these journeys might be parallel. So I'm gonna put another 3 minutes. Oh, I say oof. Okay. I'm gonna put another 3 minutes. Are there any questions? And I'll also put the prompt in the chat as well. Okay, so 3 minutes to map out your liberation journey, past, present, or future, starting now. Take about 30 more seconds to wrap up your drawing, your map. Okay. Was that enough time? Do people need some more time or are you feeling good? Give me a thumbs up or a thumbs middle down. Thumbs up. Okay, I see 1 thumbs up, 2 thumbs up. Great. Okay, so I just want you to hold that for yourself. You don't have to share that with us, and you can come back to this at any point. But sometimes I think it's just good to take an inventory of where we've been and where we've come from and what has shaped us as we move into the future that we're trying to create. I'm going to share my screen and share some of the cards in the study kit. And I want to tell you a little bit about how the cards are organized. So there were hundreds of free Black towns that emerged both before emancipation and after. And as I was learning about some of these free Black towns, specifically in the Chesapeake Tidewater region, they often follow a very similar model, which is that a family or a group of families acquire a plot of land. The first thing that they build is a school. The second thing they build, or sometimes they use the school, is a church. And then they often had what is called a benevolent society. So benevolent society is kind of like a fraternal organization, or it's a way of pooling resources together to provide for the needs of the sick, the orphaned, the elderly, the refugee. And so it's a form of mutual aid. So as I was looking at these examples of free Black towns, what started to become clear to me was that there was like a recipe for how freedom-seeking ancestors were imagining what collective liberation looked like in community. And that recipe, or the ingredients for that recipe, were land, spirit, study, and care. And so the card deck, the suits are organized by those 4 themes. So I'm going to share a little bit about what I've learned and what has emerged from this study and according to those themes. And I'm just going to ask, as I do that, for you to add or circle for yourself on your own liberation map, where those themes might exist or where you'd like those themes to exist for you. So maybe it's a practice that you'd like to commit to, or a practice that was shared with you that is related to those themes. So I'm going to share my screen again. And I just want to, okay, here we go. Can you all see these? Okay, great. I don't have a lot of time, so I'm gonna share briefly. Diamonds is the suit that pertains to land. And some of the themes, and you can see them in the cards, are waterways. So the ways that waterways were used as a resource for people to literally hide their scent when they were escaping, but also as a navigation tool. So often the most successful attempts involved some kind of body of water. So thinking about the waterways, the 4 of diamonds is a Harriet Tubman quote, says, "We are rooted here and they can't pull us up." And at the top, it says anti-colonizationists. And she specifically, there was a large movement at the time to deport free Black folks specifically to Liberia. And there were a lot of Black abolitionists who were anti-colonizationists, which meant they were anti-colonizing, recolonizing Africa in order to deport free Black folks. 5 talks about unmappability and the ways that escapes often took multiple different routes and means. Sometimes escapes were on horse, sometimes by water, sometimes by foot, sometimes by enclosure. So if anybody watched the session last week about Harriet Jacobs, and she was basically in a crawl space for 7 years. So like the time, the methods are all different based off of the context. Corn shucking time refers to harvest season, and specifically corn shucking time was when Black folks could gather. It was often around like the late autumn months. And there would be festivals where for the first time in many months, Black folks whose families were, across different plantations were able to be in the same space. And so anytime there was Black gathering, there was often some form of fugitive planning and people being able to plan their escapes, which is why Black gathering was so policed. Tending to the truck patch is the number 7 and refers to the garden patches that many enslaved folks had outside of their slave quarters. And oftentimes because of the nature of enslavement, they would mostly be tending to these gardens by moonlight. And about 40% of the enslaved diet was food that was grown or foraged or hunted or fished by enslaved people. And so just the ways that folks were tending to themselves and to their family, often by the moonlight. 8 refers to sweet potatoes and other fugitive provisions. Sweet potatoes were an easy source of nourishment and that could like be transported easily. So it was often used when folks were trying to escape. And then the last one says wild, secret, and sovereign maroon, which is basically, those are the characteristics of a maroon, someone who is living outside of a free society, who is living in secrecy and sovereign. So take a moment. Sorry, I don't want to rush through these. I see that I don't have a lot of time, but take a moment to see which one of these resonates for you. Are any of these present in your practice in some way? Some relationship with the waterways, thinking about the legacies of colonization, thinking about journeying and unmappability, thinking about sovereignty, gardening, gathering, provisions. And if you want to add something to your map or circle something on your map or think about a practice you might incorporate into your journey. Let's take a moment to note that. The next theme and suit is clubs, which refers to the theme of spirit. Some of the practices that these reference are the ring shout and the cipher, the circle as a spiritual technology for Black folks who were enslaved, call and response in different forms of communication. Harriet Tubman was known to mimic the sound of owls, so different kinds of birds or mimicking the sounds of different kinds of animals and finding ways to communicate in a coded way was really important for the freedom seeker. 6 refers to rebellion and specifically the relationship between food, conjure, and rebellion. So oftentimes root workers, conjurers, hoodoo practitioners were really integral to freedom seekers and their journey. So sometimes it was creating talismans or amulets. Sometimes it was literally creating like poisons or things that could be used to deter the hounds that might be chasing them. And so that was a really important aspect of different forms of escape and rebellion. 7 refers to armed resistance and the movement basically to fight for emancipation. 8 talks about shape-shifting and the ways that people often disguise themselves, sometimes disguising themselves as white people if they were light enough to pass, or disguising themselves as men, which was very common for women who were trying to escape. Sometimes hiding in plain sight and disguising themselves as free if they were enslaved in like a border state or in a city where there was a large free Black population. 10 refers to visions and dreaming. So both Harriet Tubman and Nat Turner were known to see visions that informed the ways that they organized. And then the Queen refers to our relationship to the ocean. Oyster shells were specifically used to honor folks who had transitioned and would be used on gravestones. So take a moment here to consider where spirit exists in your liberation journey. Mark something on your map that you want to amplify or remember or call forth. And I'll move on to spades. Spades is about study. It talks about how important study was for Black folks. There's a quote that soon after emancipation, there was a quote where someone was observing and they saw Black folks going around carrying books everywhere. And just the importance of literacy, specifically because Black folks were the only people in this country who were criminalized for reading. And so thinking about the relationship between literacy and legibility, the ways that we've used coded language or body language or song or dance in order to communicate when when communicating was precarious. Before and again refers to the ways that people escaped over and over again. So most folks who successfully escaped did so on their third or fourth attempt. So just imagine what you have to go through and what you'd have to risk to escape once, and how you might have been punished, or your loved ones might have been punished because of you, and then having to do that multiple times. 8 refers to a quote that's in the Nat Turner Confessions, where it says he was fully satisfied as to the impracticability of his attempt. So it invites us to think about impracticability, like even when conditions seem impossible, or resistance seems impossible or improbable, or that it won't be successful, that it still is important and necessary. And we continue to learn about Nat Turner's legacy and legacies of resistance because of what he did, even though he also kind of knew that it couldn't work, or it couldn't work in his time. But that didn't mean that it didn't have successful ramifications over time. Contagion references Black watermen, who specifically were often people who were smuggling in abolitionist materials to Southern slave states and were smuggling out people. So oftentimes ships were mentioned in fugitive slave ads, and watermen were actually called contagions because of the ways that they were bringing in abolitionist ideas to slave states. The Jack refers to constellations that were used as a way of navigating, and the Queen refers to music and the way that music instruments were used as a way to communicate and create spaces of Black gathering. So take a moment here, consider where study exists in your liberation journey, what you might be calling forth, or what you'd like to remember and honor. And lastly is the suit of hearts. The hearts refer to practices of care. This first one references both how Black folks would harbor people in their slave quarters, and also how they would often grow basil outside as a form of spiritual protection. Footwork refers to dancing and movement. Often there were secret dance parties that enslaved people would have in the woods. And this was a way to kind of reclaim their bodies, their time, their joy. So even amidst captivity and degradation and violence, Black folks still found a way to find each other and to live in the fullness of our bodies. And that was also a space where, highly policed, it was highly dangerous for people to do that. So there were also protective ways that people would mask in the sound using wet blankets, or have different kind of like booby traps set in the woods, so that if a trap got triggered, they would know that they need to disperse quickly. Contraband refers to the ways that Black folks would escape specifically during the Civil War to Union encampments. Oftentimes they would then serve in the Union Army to fight during the Civil War. But contraband camps existed throughout the South, and often in major cities, you can find where there are Black corridors or corridors of Black culture. There was a contraband camp there, because Black folks who were refugees and escaping their enslavement often settled around where the contraband camps were. The National Ex-Slave Mutual Relief and Bounty Pension Association was one of the first mass movements for reparations. And it was led by a Black woman named Callie House, who was helping Black folks petition for back pay and pensions for their exploited labor. Stealing oneself refers to petite marronage, which was often a practice by Black women who were more relegated to the plantation, were more heavily punished when they tried for any act of resistance or escape. And so oftentimes Black women would escape to the woods for days, weeks, or months at a time, and then return to their captivity, often because of social, like family and social obligations. But it was a way for them for a moment in time to find some kind of refuge for themselves and sometimes to evade violence from their enslavers. 10 refers to a concept called more Black than free, which is a concept that kind of was created in the Upper South, Maryland, Delaware, Virginia, where there were large free Black populations. And because the nature of slavery in these areas, free Black populations and enslaved populations had very similar conditions. And oftentimes you could be in a family where your father was free and your mother was enslaved, and your brother was free and your sister was enslaved. Like there were families that had free Black folks and enslaved Black folks. And oftentimes both free and enslaved Black folks were working and living side by side. And so white folks referred to them as more Black than free, which meant that they were more in solidarity with one another than they were with this idea of freedom, because freedom was associated with whiteness. In some places in the Deep South, there's a different term that was more free than Negro. And that often emerged because there were larger delineations in terms of the conditions of free Blacks and enslaved Blacks, where there was just more of a chasm there in terms of what their lives were like. And then lastly, the king refers to sitting parties and sewing circles, which were ways that free Black folks would raise money or create clothing and things like that could help folks who were escaping. So take a moment in this last minute to just recognize where care might exist on your chart and what that might look like for you, to note that in your own map of liberation. And I know we're out of time, but I just hope that these sharings, and this is like just a bunch of information all at once, but I'm hoping that there's ways that you will see your own journey paralleled in the journey of our freedom-seeking ancestors, and that your own journey for personal liberation and collective liberation within your community can be nourished by some of these practices that I've shared today. So I'm going to stop my share, and I don't know if we have time to take questions, but I'm happy to put my information in the chat if you have any questions or want to follow up directly.
Thank you so much, Jessica. If we can get a round of applause, that would be great.
I hope we can hear it.
I will say that right now it is 7:16, so I want to recognize that our member teams are starting. So if y'all want to stay behind, resource member team meeting, you can join the resource member team breakout room. And then arts and cultural organizing, we are going to start transitioning in the physical space. While we're doing that, if there are any questions people want to ask or drop in the chat, so we can just keep it for notes, things that we can continue thinking about, that would be great. And if Jessica, if you will have time to answer one question as we're transitioning into this space, if that's okay with folks, we can do that. Great, thank you. And feel free to hop into resource organizing team. James, Natasha, and Genoa are in there.
Can I ask a question? So you refer to something, I am not even sure if I'm pronouncing this right, but it's like marinage, or what can you spell that? And and tell me a little bit what that is?
Yeah, marinage, it's spelled Marronage. It's also called maroonage, Maroonagage. And it it comes from the word cimarron, which actually means feral pig, and was a term that was used in Jamaica by Spanish enslavers to refer to Black folks who had escaped, and they would escape into the mountains. And in Jamaica, they formed whole maroon communities where they lived in sovereign communities together. So that's where the term marinage originates, or what we know of it. folks who were Maroons in the US were not often called Maroons, but they were called outliers or runaways. And what is specific to Maroons that is different than all freedom seekers is that freedom seekers are escaping, but Maroons specifically are escaping to woods, swamps, mountains, forested areas, and creating their own existence outside of the systems of slavery or the so-called free societies or like free states that existed.
Thank you. And this
Yeah.
was just very informative. I learned so much in a very short period of time. Thanks so much.
I'm glad. Thank you.
I'm sorry, y'all could still hear us in person.
If they're on Zoom, so let me call.
Yep.
Okay, if there aren't any other questions, feel free to drop in the chat. I see, Jessica, you put your information. Thank you for coming through. Yes,
Thank
I will
you.
stop.
I appreciate y'all. Thank y'all for inviting me to share, and stay tuned for the How We Be Free study kit, which hopefully will be available to share more publicly in the fall.
Yay, can't wait.